Is subscription gaming still a good deal for gamers?
And can Microsoft finally seal the deal with Activision Blizzard? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Uniden Australia.
Konnichiwa! Vertical hold behind the tech news. Australia no show. Oh, wait. I'm not in Japan anymore, am I? Damn! So close! So close! Let me start that again. Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the award winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, joined as usual by Adam Turner. Hey, Adam, this week, Netflix quietly dropped its basic package. That's the one that doesn't have ads that was otherwise cheap, $10.99, I think, here in Australia, but it's dropped it in the US and the UK. Now, there's no official sign yet at time of recording that they're going to do that for Australia, but they already kind of hide it when you try and pick it. So it's not really looking good for Australia either. Do you reckon there's still a big market for that basic package?
See, I got to admit that I totally misunderstood when I first saw this, and I thought the point was that they dropped the basic ad-supported package, the $6.99 sort of deal, which
They
I
like
thought,
the ads, Adam. They make the money.
that's what I thought. It's a bit odd because people are, cutting back on expenses and stuff, and you think that that tier would appeal to people. I think Netflix's problem though is they're already the most bloody expensive by far, especially if you want to get like 4K out of them.
There's this
Whereas
little service called Foxtel. You might have heard of them.
True. But like if you go to Disney or some of the others, there's none of this. You got to pay extra for 4K or you got to pay extra for more users, right? So Netflix is already, if you're crunching the numbers going, something's got to give, Netflix is already on the short list of something that's got to go. I think they've just maybe made more people's shortlist at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting that they've chosen the US and the UK for this. They're big markets. You'd almost think like we might be the ones getting prodded with the pointy stick because we're a good test market, but Netflix is going to do what it's going to do. But subscriptions are very much our topic for this week. We're also joined once again by Kotaku Australia's freshly minted managing editor, David Smith. David, does the presence or absence of ads or that basic tier on Netflix bother you all that much?
Hello, boys. I mean, a little, yeah. Like, I mean, would prefer to have a basic tier that doesn't have the ads in it. You know what I mean? If I'm moving to an ad supported tier, I get bothered by ads on YouTube as it is. They play me 2 ads and it takes 30 seconds, and that makes my teeth itch. So the idea of Netflix with ads, just doesn't sit right to me. It feels like going back to free to air TV. I'd
Shut
rather
up.
not.
Oof.
Mm-mm.
So they're forcing you up rather than forcing you
Very
down,
much so.
is what you're saying. If you're on the $10 tier, you wouldn't go back to the 6. You'd either go up to the
Yep.
14 or you'd tell them to stick it.
Yep, pretty much. I'd rather go up to the option that's got more screens on it or 4K or whatever it is they use to justify the higher price point. I'd rather go up to that than go back down to the ads.
Which could well, of course, be the entire point, creating that point of separation. However, we are not, in fact, here to discuss Netflix. We're here to discuss games. David's here because it's a big week in the gaming world, and certain members of my household would be exceptionally happy if we turned it all into the Pikmin 4 show. But I have to disappoint them, which probably means I'm not getting dinner anytime soon, because instead we're actually going to be talking mostly about games subscription services and how that market's been changing recently and not always for the better. But first, a business story, which is also
Huzzah!
a
Supply chain?
gaming story, Adam, not a supply chain story. And it's a business and gaming story that feels like it's been going on forever now. This is Microsoft buying out Activision Blizzard, which it first announced, I want to say more than a year ago for
Just over.
$69 billion with a B.
Mhm.
But despite the presence of that incredibly large sum of money, it's still not quite been able to actually close that deal. David, what's the latest on this one?
So, the story that never ends. This week, it seems as though Xbox has finally crossed this, what I would say is the second to last hurdle to closing this deal. It has successfully convinced the US courts, the US federal courts, I should say, that the deal is sound and that it should be allowed to move ahead. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the States, was not able to mount a sufficiently convincing case to prevent the deal from moving ahead, at least in the United States. And Microsoft's path to getting the deal over the line, at least in the US, is now clear. Getting the deal over the line in the US is exactly what they want. Many other territories will fall in line with that. At this point, it seems as though the path is clear now. They could more or less proceed with the deal until, and this just came over this morning, very, very late last night, 10:47 p.m., July 19, from Xbox head Phil Spencer. Microsoft and Activision Blizzard have extended the merger agreement deadline to the 18th of October. We're optimistic about getting this done and excited about bringing more games to players everywhere. So if they've got the path clear, why are they delaying again? Well, this is sort of the final hurdle in the story. They still have to deal with the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK regulator, who notoriously swatted them down just a couple of months ago. This looked like it was going to drag on possibly into next year because of what the CMA decided, its first ruling. And that was back in, I want to say, May, I believe, not all that long ago. Now, with the FTC being beaten out in the courts, the CMA finds itself in an interesting position. Microsoft has gone back to the CMA to say, we have more information, similar to what we presented to the courts with the FTC, that we think you should see. Maybe it'll change your mind. The CMA has said, okay, we will look at it. And its original deadline for looking at this information was, I believe, the 18th of July, which was just a couple of days ago. We love deadlines as they blow on past. And now it is said we're actually going to make that decision in August, the 29th of August. So this explains Microsoft moving this deal along. The idea was that it basically promised Activision, we're going to have this deal done by the 18th of July, or we're going to have to pay you a $3 billion fine. But because the CMA is now going to drag its feet into August, they have to change their date. Everything's got to shuffle down a little bit. The thing goes on longer. The story goes on longer. This is where we find ourselves now. Microsoft giving itself a little bit of extra breathing room to make sure that it can actually close this deal in October and have everything done, the story told, and Call of Duty, most importantly, under its rooftop, just the way it wanted.
Well, I was going to say on the Call of Duty front, it's been running around signing deals to say, we promise you'll get Call of Duty.
Yep.
I think Sony was the last big hurdle there to fall. But is this deal really just about Call of Duty players? I mean, the Activision Blizzard portfolio is pretty wide, isn't it?
It's huge. Call of Duty is a significant part of the deal, but you're absolutely right. Like the Blizzard portfolio, the other side of the business, is just as massive. In its it's like a legendary collection of games. Like the three of us are sort of older guys as far as gaming goes. We all sort of we know and love many of the Blizzard games, like the original Warcraft 2, StarCraft, the first Diablo game. These are all legendary titles, and those franchises will all fall under Microsoft's roof as well, including some of the newer stuff that Blizzard's been working on, like World of Warcraft, which is a big one for them. Xbox does not have an MMO. It will become Xbox's MMO. Overwatch is another big one that goes hand in hand with Call of Duty, and an impressive online multiplayer shooter that a lot of people love. There's a huge amount of value in it for Xbox.
Is that why Microsoft wants Activision Blizzard? Not so much just because it wants to own it, because then it's got nice content to feed to its gaming platform.
Straight into Game Pass. That's the idea.
Yeah.
All of it is going to go straight on Game Pass. All of the legacy stuff's going to go straight on Game Pass, and there it will stay because Microsoft owns it. They don't have to cycle it off the platform. We've seen it do this with Bethesda as well. It purchased Bethesda because it wanted that massive back catalogue of games to feed right into the hungry beast that is Game Pass. And we're going to see them do it again with Activision Blizzard. Are they going to continue? Are they just going to keep swallowing up larger publishers to feed this hungry beast? We will have to see. But at 69 billion US dollars, one would hope this might slow Microsoft's roll for a little while.
See, I'm just hoping that this means that they'll announce a Lost Vikings 3.
Oh, come on.
I'm possibly the only one who's waiting on that
I would take that. I would take that in a heartbeat.
But this also puts Microsoft, I'll say that again. This also puts Microsoft into a few other game spaces because Activision Blizzard owns King, so they own Candy
Mhm.
Crush. Microsoft will own Candy Crush as well.
Yep.
They'll be in that mobile IAP space as well, which is not exactly Xbox centric, is it?
Definitely not. This is I think this is probably Microsoft's first major push into mobile, and that is another major consideration. The mobile arm of, well, we say Activision Blizzard, but it is indeed Activision Blizzard King.
Hmm.
The mobile arm of that company is incredibly lucrative, as we know, and that has got to be on their minds 100%. Candy Crush is obviously massive, but King have plenty of other games that they make quite a lot of money out of. That will absolutely be one pathway to Microsoft trying to make a bit of this money back for sure.
Well, Microsoft's got a long and glorious history of paying stupid amounts of money for businesses that have already jumped the
That's
shark.
right.
I'm looking at you, Nokia. I'm looking at Skype. I'm looking at Aquantive, maybe LinkedIn, depending on how generous you're
Mm.
feeling. Is this another one where they might look back and regret it?
That is a very good question. It was certainly like as as corporate takeovers go, this one certainly had like had the motive of opportunity. Microsoft very much saw a wounded gazelle on the plane. Activision Blizzard was really going through a tough moment in the public sphere a couple of years ago, and that was the moment Xbox was like, "Oh, we could get a deal on that."
Hmm.
Um, Is it going to come back and bite them? We will have to see. We will see what it inherits when all is said and done, what it keeps, what it throws away. There was some talk at a certain point about divestiture, whether it would have to start breaking up this massive company and the IP that it controls in order to complete this deal. It doesn't seem that that's the case. So now the ball is very much in Microsoft's court as to, yeah, what it keeps and what it throws away here. And I suspect that a lot of what it is going to throw away will probably be people that work within these companies. How is it going to restructure them? How is it going to absorb them? And yeah, how many of those staff that are still at Activision Blizzard are they going to hold on to? I dare say CEO Bobby Kotick is not coming along for the ride.
So, what does history tell us? Because normally, when big companies make big acquisitions like this, you can look at what they've done in the past to have a stab at what might happen to the thing they've just snapped up.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you mentioned Skype before. That's kind of a perfect example. That was a really wonderful program that an awful lot of people were using. And where is it now? It,
How did it not succeed in the pandemic? I don't. That
how?
that
It
makes no
still
sense.
technically sort of
It
exists.
still exists, but like, do they tend to go through and gut them and sell things off, or do they go through and shut down all the things that aren't doing very well and just keep the big things? Like, if you love one of the little games that Activision makes, should you be sweating right now?
Maybe, yeah, and that's like a part of me wonders. Like Activision themselves tend to only deal in heavy hitters. They only want safe
Hmm.
bets. They only want stuff that's going to make money. So it's Call of Duty, and or at least the last couple of years, it's been Call of Duty and it's been Crash Bandicoot remakes. Um, Xbox is going to get some other stuff out of that as well, stuff like Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I can absolutely see them bringing that back. In whatever form, I don't know, but I can see them doing something with it because it's a popular IP. I have to imagine that there's going to be a lot of stuff from the archives, like the really old school stuff from when Activision was a very new.
Pitfall remake.
This is the
Pitfall
thing. This is the thing.
remake.
If Xbox wants an Uncharted competitor, what do you think they're going to pull out of the vault? They're
Hmm.
going straight to Pitfall. Like you're going to see this old Atari stuff coming back out of the vault. You know what I mean?
Well, I was going to say though, in terms of the acquisitions, I think Microsoft's done a fair bit better with the game stuff that it's bought than anything else. It's been maybe so with Rare, bit up, bit
Mm,
down, few too many Connect games. But Bethesda, it's done pretty well out of. It paid a lot of money for Minecraft, but it seems to have made pretty much all of that back and then
mm,
some just in Minecraft plushies
yeah.
alone. So its track record there, I think, is a little bit better than its track record of buying other tech companies.
It seems so. Don't forget they did have a bit of a stumble with Bethesda this year with Redfall. Redfall was the 4-player vampire
Mm.
co-op shooter that came out only in April, May, and it bombed. It tanked hard. It's hard to know how that game sort of went so wrong, basically. But it certainly seems as though there was meddling from management at some level, trying to produce a game that the people who made it, Arcane, are not, then it's not the kind of game that they would ordinarily make. Multiplayer shooters are not something that that company has made before, that developer has made before, and it felt like there may have been an element of Xbox leaning on them and being like, "We need one of these, and you guys are going to be the ones to do it." Um, is that the sort of
So Shadowrun all over again.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, like it's an unfortunate situation. Certainly, there is. I mean, Kotaku just read a story the other week about how there was a small but dedicated group of fans who are still playing that game a couple of months on, even though everybody seems to have moved on. I mean, is that sort of like a grim portent for the future for what Microsoft could start to do with these really important franchises that it has now paid an awful lot of money to secure from Activision?
So we've been talking about Microsoft buying Activision, and it's doing that on the back of the revenue it can raise out of primarily Xbox gamers, and especially the revenue it can raise out of subscriptions, because subscriptions are big for Microsoft. You want Office? We want you to subscribe to it. Eventually, you want Windows? We want you to subscribe to it. And for a number of years now, it's offered various subscription packages under the Game Pass banner. And this week, it launched Game Pass Core, which sounds like it should be something out of a carry-on film. Game Pass Core, but it isn't. David, what is Game Pass Core at its heart?
Game Pass Core is essentially just a redressed version of an older subscription service called Xbox Live Gold. For people who've been around since the early 2000s, I guess at the very least, when this service launched, it's one of the
I resemble that remark.
It's one of the oldest gaming subscription services out there. It came about in about 2002. I don't know that it launched in Australia. Probably launched in Australia a couple of years after that because broadband was obviously not very big here.
It didn't take long,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. It was in the States first.
Yeah,
sure.
definitely in the States first, and then they rolled it out elsewhere. I remember it being a bit of a curveball for gamers at the time because we weren't used to paying monthly. At that time, gaming was very much something that you bought a game once and then that was it. And here was Microsoft saying, well, we need a way to fund this online platform that we've got. We need a way to keep the servers for the games that you want to play together online. We're going to have to we're going to send that on to the consumer. We're going to pass that on to you, and for a certain amount, you could pay for. I believe it was a month, 3 months, or a year. And a year ran you about $90 at the time, and I think it stayed about that for the duration. And this got you online play. It got you access to deals on the Xbox Game Store. They discount games that were sort of popular at the time. If you had a subscription, you get them cheaper. And eventually, they also implemented a program called Games with Gold. Games with Gold basically gave you 2 or 3 free games every month as long as you kept your subscription active, and you could access those for as long as the subscription stayed active. PlayStation actually nicked that. It was such a good idea. They've been doing it themselves for several years, and they've been giving away really like top tier titles every single month. Great way to drive subscriptions. All of this is ending, but it is also going nowhere because Xbox is going to repackage it as Game Pass Core, and it's going to get you basically everything that you got with Xbox Live Gold, sans Games with Gold. They're taking that program and they're doing away with it because what do you need the free games for if you've got a basic subscription to Game Pass? You won't get the full Game Pass library with Core. You'll get a sort of cut down version of the library. I would imagine you're probably going to get a rotating roster of greatest hits. And this, I believe, is all set to kick off in August.
And they're doing, because you mentioned Games with Gold, and they've done that for years and years and years. And I think it's fair to say the past couple of years has not been really stacked with the heavy hitters.
Definitely not.
Some questionable choices. But speaking of questionable, they're doing this weird thing with Games with Gold. If you're a subscriber and you keep on with Game Pass Core, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's if you've got Xbox 360 games, which are still forward, backward compatible, that whole kind of good thing that Microsoft does. If you've got those, you get to keep them.
Yep.
They're just yours. Microsoft's just going, yeah, okay, fine, whatever.
Hang on to them.
But if you've got Xbox One games through Games with Gold, you'll only be able to access those if you keep at least Game Pass Core up and running, which is absolutely identical to what PlayStation does with anything it's ever given away.
Yep.
If you don't have an active PlayStation Plus subscription of some sort, then anything you've got there, you just don't have access to at all.
That's right. Yeah. Like, and it makes sense. Like, At this point, Xbox Live Gold has become, I mean, even in terms of branding, has become kind of vestigial. It's just sort of a throwback to an older version of the company, an older version of the brand. It makes sense that they'd want to roll it into Game Pass and just kind of keep all of that together, keep all of that united, so that there's less confusion about what you get with your sub.
Subscriptions work differently across different types of content in terms of what you do and don't
Mm.
get. I mean, Spotify would be a good example because you could argue, okay, I pay for Spotify because it saves me money because then I don't buy albums at all, pretty much. But that's okay because when a new album comes out, it comes out pretty much the same day on
Mm.
Spotify. The good thing is that music doesn't tend to disappear. The annoying thing with Netflix is you can say, okay, well, I pay for Netflix and I don't go and buy those movies on disc or whatever, but then they may disappear from Netflix. Now, with these streaming game
Mm.
services, are they saving me money? Am I likely to buy fewer games? Or when a new game comes out, it was always like, well, that's the big, exciting game everybody wants. So there's no way you're going to get it on the subscription service. So you're still going to pay $100 for it anyway.
Yeah, it's Microsoft have found themselves in an interesting situation with this one, and it comes back to this acquisition spree they've been on. All of these major studios and publishers that they've bought, their games all go up on Game Pass day one. Like
Hmm.
Bethesda's big game Starfield, which will be one of the bigger games for the back half of 2023, that's a day one title for Game Pass. You pay your $12 or whatever it is to get access to Game Pass, and you can play one of the biggest games of the year for that small amount of money. And that game's going to be on there permanently. It's not going to be rotated off the way Netflix rotates movies off. It's just going to stay there because Microsoft owns that game, owns that publisher, and can keep it there. There are other games, third-party publishers and things like that, that do get cycled on and off the platform, that you don't necessarily get to keep, and it will tell you once it's been cycled off the platform. If it's still installed and you try and play it, it will say, hey, listen, it has left the platform, but because you played it on Game Pass and you've still got it installed, we'll give you a discount if you wanted to buy it. So there's ways and means of them still being able to get you even after, even if
Yep.
it's outside the realm of the subscription. Um, there's a lot of different facets to the way Xbox runs this platform for sure.
Well, what about Call of Duty? Because that's the big one. Is
Yeah,
the day it comes out in the shops, well, online shops, physical shops.
yeah.
Can I get it through one of these Game Pass things the same day?
Microsoft's not been terribly clear, but it seems like no. This was the one. This is going to be the sticking point. This will be the one that Xbox says no. This one you're still going to have to buy, even though we own it, because it wouldn't. This was the crux of Sony's argument to the regulators, particularly in the States, that Xbox would gain an unfair advantage in the marketplace if it could simply put Call of Duty, brand new Call of Duty, up on Game Pass day and date, and people still had to buy it on PlayStation. Why would you buy it on PS5 if you can just grab it for $12 on Xbox
Yeah.
and hang on to it? I have to imagine that in its rush to make peace with as many third party publishers, including PlayStation, as it can, around Call of Duty, that it's going to have to surrender that ground. It's going to have to have ceded that. You'll still have to pay for Call of Duty.
So, in terms of paying for things, though, this gets kind of complicated because you've got like Game Pass, which Game Pass costs you like $12 a month, something like
Yep.
that. You've then got the PC version, which I want to say off the top of my head's $15 or something like that.
Mm.
And then you've got Ultimate, which is both.
Yep.
PlayStation has like 2 or 3 tiers. I mean, even Nintendo and their offering is significantly paler, shall we say, compared to what Sony and Microsoft are doing. Even they've got separate tiers depending on whether or not you want their expansion pass, which gives you N64 games and various bits of DLC bundled in there.
Yep.
It gets kind of confusing. It can get kind of expensive.
Mm.
So, I mean, 2 questions here. Firstly, a very Xbox specific one. Is that whole Dodge deal where you could do the $1 a month and convert up a bunch of usage still actually a thing? And who's actually got the value here, in your view, out of all 3 platforms?
Ooh, that's a good one. As far as the $1 deal goes, the $1 deal went away and now it's come back, because they sort of rearranged their pricing. They had to bump up their pricing a couple of bucks across the tiers. So they took the $1 away while they did that, and now it's back. And I believe if you've done it right, yes, you can still stack it. So there, you do have that going for you. If you're still on Xbox Live Gold and you haven't rolled your subscription over to a Game Pass sub of any stripe, whatever you've got left of your Xbox Gold sub can be converted into Game Pass and then it will start a fresh sub once that runs out. So you do have that option available to you. In terms of who's got the best one, oh man,
Presuming that you had access to all three consoles, because obviously someone who's only got a Switch or a PlayStation or an Xbox can't subscribe to the other, or
ooh,
isn't likely to subscribe to the other ones.
I feel like when the PlayStation's version came out, I did think it was the weaker of the two options, but it has made up pretty significant ground in areas that Xbox hasn't made up, where Xbox has bought a bunch of publishers to pad out that library, and it's got a lot of great games on there now. PlayStation's been making inroads with other publishers as well. Take Ubisoft, for example, like a whole heap of Ubisoft's back catalog, like Assassin's Creed games and Far Cry and things like that, are all part and parcel of the PS Plus deal, but they're not on Game Pass. You've still got to pay an extra fee for Ubisoft Plus because Ubisoft's got its own subscription as well. Guess what,
Because of
guys?
course they do.
Guess what, guys? The publishers have got their own subscriptions as well. You've got to pay extra for Ubisoft and get all of those games on Xbox. Xbox has its own version of this, struck a deal with EA to combine EA's subscription service into the Game Pass Ultimate platform. So you get access to all of EA's library over on Game Pass. I feel like it's a wishy-washy answer, but in terms of where they're both at now, it does feel like they're on a more even keel than they were perhaps 12 months ago. There are still confusing aspects. I absolutely agree. PlayStation has one big problem in Australia where it has its three tiers, the essential, extra, and deluxe. Deluxe is kind of an Australia only thing. If you're elsewhere in the world, particularly in the States, that's called premium, I believe. And the difference between the two is we don't have cloud streaming. They had a cloud streaming app that was built into PlayStation called PlayStation Now. It's now defunct, but that was the platform they stuck all their old PS3 games on. We don't have that functionality. So they changed the name and called it Deluxe and charged us only slightly less for it. Um, that does mean when PlayStation puts PS3 games into its classics library, because it breaks its rollout of games every single month into here's the banger titles that we're going to give you, the really big AAA U-Butte stuff, and then we're going to put in some classics as well, some older titles from previous generations. If there's any PS3 games included in that, Sony just don't give them to us. So you kind of lose out on classics for that month if they do it, if you live in Australia. Yeah, there's still those confusing aspects to it. That our piece explaining all of those breakdowns on Kotaku Australia last year was one of our most widely read because people needed a way to like sort it all out and try and figure out where the value was.
And meanwhile, if you're a Switch gamer, you can pay them to play Mario Picross.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Like, I mean, the value for me in the Nintendo one is strictly in the retro catalog. Nintendo released a bunch of emulators that go along with the Nintendo Switch online platform, and they've been updating them semi-regularly. There's stuff from the Mega Drive era, the NES era. They recently added Game Boy and Nintendo 64 stuff to it. There's a lot of really good gear on there, and Nintendo kind of gets to curate what goes on it. But for me, that's kind of where the value lies on that one. If you love retro games, great platform. Otherwise, you could probably save your money.
Well, it gives you I see. I take the exact opposite view, but then to be fair, there's very very little I've added to that retro library, and you're right, it's really good. That isn't already physically sitting on my
Totally,
shelf,
right? Yeah.
personally. So I'm a bit of an edge case. Whereas I take the view that it's not terrible because it's considerably cheaper.
Yeah.
And does the online gaming and cloud saves thing. I'm happy enough to kind of cover that,
Yeah.
I suppose. The question is though, so we've now seen this position where everyone's scrambling to buy it, big studios, Activision Blizzard obviously, but Sony's not been immune to this either.
Oh.
And we've got these complex plans out there. Is this the point where instead of having, really nice $1 deals and really consumer friendly stuff, that they start to put the screws in on us and start charging more and more and more and more?
Yeah, it kind of feels like we're reaching that point, doesn't it? Like $69 billion of how you got to make this money back somehow, don't you? Like, sure, your market cap's in the trillions, but like $69 billion is $69 billion. Where's
And they're still paying off Nokia.
we're still paying off Nokia. Yeah, it certainly does feel like we're reaching a point where like the worm's going to turn and they're going to have to start charging more for this stuff. Now, like we've just been through console price increases, and yeah, Game Pass did just rise by a couple of bucks, but could it go up again? Like, I mean, anything's possible. It's a big library. It can't be cheap to maintain. It can't be cheap to continue to buy new licenses to put up there, even though they're time limited. Like, yeah, it's a tough one. I could absolutely see the price continuing to go up, and that's true of PlayStation as well.
So you mentioned cloud gaming earlier, and it was the big thing, and then we just don't hear about it anymore. Maybe mostly in Australia, but did Google give it away altogether? Like, what's happening with cloud
Yeah,
gaming?
Google.
Oh, hang on, maybe we should explain what's the difference between a subscription library and cloud
Oh,
gaming.
sure. I mean, in terms of like the Game Pass offering, the Xbox offering, there, if you're on the Xbox Ultimate subscription, the top end, most expensive version, they roll Xbox Cloud Gaming into that package. So you're basically, rather than running the game directly on your Xbox console or on your PC, you're basically streaming that game to your monitor remotely. There is a PC in a server farm somewhere, probably nearby in your nearest capital city, that will spool up and will play that game at the highest possible settings on that computer. And the vision from that machine will be streamed to you at low latency so that it feels like you're playing it live. You're actually not, you're playing it a couple of milliseconds later. But the effect is pretty good. You do have to have really strong internet for some of the more competitive stuff. Stuff like Call of Duty is a good example of a game that just doesn't work very well on cloud gaming, at least in Australia. You still want to be able to have that installed and on your console right now. PlayStation in Australia, no cloud gaming contingent whatsoever. Google, you mentioned, they've pretty much given it up. They made a go of it with Google Stadia. It never really made it out of the US. It was an interesting product, maybe a little bit ahead of its time. Microsoft, interestingly enough, came in and kind of made that space its own. Did really, really well. Turned the fully armed and operational battle station of Microsoft Azure on it, and kind of solve the problem that way. Just brute force it with low latency
Easier
setups.
when you actually physically have local servers, which they
Hmm.
did for business
That's right.
purposes.
That's right. And they can scale them up and scale them down and do all the rest of it. So they're basically just using that as their platform for it. I've found it to be useful on holiday, and it's, again, I only really play like indie games on it. I played a little game called Spiritfarer on it, which was a very sweet little game about death, funnily enough. It's very cute. It's about mourning. And it's very like 2D pixelated kind of retro style graphics. And that's easy enough for it to pass and get onto your system and play in low latency. If you go any more complicated than that, like if I jump into Sea of Thieves or something like that, it doesn't work. It gets too laggy and it becomes unplayable. It's interesting tech, and I'm glad that it's part of the Game Pass solution. I can see it becoming a bigger and bigger part of Xbox's business model as internet infrastructure evolves over time. To the extent that I may not even wind up with an Xbox or a PlayStation in front of my TV anymore. They just get rid of the box, sell you the controller and a subscription, and you're away.
Well, that was sort of the Stadia model. But I was going to say, what does all of this mean for those of us, and by those of us, I mean me, who still likes to own games, who still likes a thing on a shelf, a thing that I've bought, a thing that I can
Mhm.
control the access to? I know I'm a dinosaur in a lot of ways. Am I particularly a dinosaur in this
I
sense?
don't think so. No, like there's plenty of people. A lot of our readers on Kotaku feel the exact same way. They would prefer. This feels like there's a sense of ownership over.
Hmm.
Like, you have that console. That is a real tangible object that you have in your home, and you can go out to EB Games or JB Hi-Fi and you can buy a disc. That is a real tangible object that you own. They can't pull a disc down off a server. Do you know what I mean? They can't take it away from you. There is that fear, I think, of the digital library going away, or the license running out, and the game having to be pulled from sale and you can't have it anymore, that kind of thing that plays into it. As far as like that changeover from having a physical console to an all cloud model, we're years away from it. It's not like it's going to happen. It's not like we're going to have the Series X and the PS5, and then that's it. Consoles go away. We never see them again. That's not the case. There will be more. There will be others, and I expect they'll probably continue for another decade at least, and then you'll see them tapering off as things begin to change.
Well, I'm just going to stock up on beans and shotgun shells if they try and come for my snares. That's all I'm saying.
I feel the same.
Cold dead hand.
That's right.
Out of his
That's
cold
right.
dead hand.
You know, I can't have my copy of Donkey Kong Country. It's mine.
Well, that just about wraps up this week's episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to David for joining us this week.
Of course, mate. Thank you for having me.
And now it's time, as it always is, for the Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. I will ask all 3 of them in order. You can answer them in any order you like. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on whatever social media you choose to inhabit these days? It's far too complicated to name just one. And this week's special contentious question. Imagine you're in charge of this Activision Blizzard buyout, and you personally, David, can be given the rights and ownership of any one game they ever made. Any of those companies. Which game is it and why?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. Oh my God. You can find me at Kotaku Australia. It's a video game website, kotaku.com.au every day. We're talking about video games, hanging out with my friend Emily. Yeah, you can come and see us over there. You can find me on the social medias at Runewords. That's RHUNWORDS. I have to think twice about how to spell that every time I say it out loud. And that's across every social media platform because I couldn't be bothered coming up with a different name for each one. As for oh my God, what game would I bring back? Oh, I know what it is. I'm going to have to look it up, but it's a Blizzard one. Oh my goodness. It was on the Super Nintendo. It was
Rock and Roll Racing by any
It
chance?
was this.
Lost.
Rock and Roll
Lost
Racing is a
Vikings?
good one, but no, it was Blackthorn.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah,
Very nice.
you know what? I'm bringing back Blackthorn. We're gonna bring that back. We're remaking it. It's AAA, baby. We're going for it.
That's an excellent choice. You see, I was thinking, were it me, I would actually take over Call of Duty just because I want that filthy
You want
money.
that? You want that money?
flowing my
You
way.
want that Milsim money? Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But while I dream about what could be, you can catch us at Vertical Hold online, at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, on Instagram, the Vertical Hold Facebook page, and at verticalhold.com.au.
And thanks everyone for dropping by, and drop us a line. Let us know what you think about the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal. Let us know what you think about gaming subscription services. Just let us know what you think about things in general. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Uniden Australia.
You don't want to know how many copies of Donkey Kong Country I have.
Why do we all have multiple copies of that game? Like everybody's got like 3 or 4 copies of DKC.